Welcome to Pure Nonfiction, the podcast interviewing documentary filmmakers. I'm Tom Powers, the documentary programmer for the Toronto International Film Festival and artistic director of Doc NYC. On this episode, I talked to director Jennifer Brea. Her film, Unrest, is a personal exploration of a mysterious illness that affects over 1 million people around the world, including her. You've probably heard the term chronic fatigue syndrome, but many people feel that name is misleading and stigmatizing. I'll let Jennifer pronounce the more official name.
Myalgic encephalomyelitis.
The abbreviation is ME. Jennifer first experienced the disease in her late 20s. She was a graduate student at Harvard, about to get married to her husband Omar. She got a terrible fever that left her dizzy for weeks at a time. Doctors made widely varying diagnoses.
It really wasn't until about 1.5 years after that first infection that I started to develop severe neurological problems, and within about a month became completely bedridden. And at that point, I knew that something was deeply wrong.
Jennifer started keeping a video diary that she incorporates into Unrest.
I had no idea if it would be months or years or decades. It was like I had died, but was forced to watch as the world moved on.
In the film, she not only documents her own experience, she reaches out to other people affected by ME, often interviewing them by video conference. Her film shines a light on this overlooked population who are sometimes misunderstood by healthcare providers and even their own families. Unrest had its premiere in January 2017 at the Sundance Film Festival. That's when we recorded this interview. Jennifer still struggles with ME and is confined to a wheelchair, but she's found certain drug regimens that help, and she toured for the film's theatrical release this fall. Unrest is now available on digital platforms. This year, 170 documentary features qualified for the Oscars. The Academy's documentary branch reduces that number to its annual shortlist of 15 films. Unrest made it onto the shortlist as a true underdog without the backing of a big company like Netflix or Amazon. In this interview, Jennifer describes how she went from being an untrained filmmaker to pulling off this impressive work. I started by asking why she doesn't like the term chronic fatigue syndrome.
I think because the sort of common layperson's understanding of fatigue is, we all get tired from time to time, and people, for a variety of reasons, whether it's an illness or just a particularly stressful moment in time, can feel run down. And that's really not what this disease is. It's a sort of defect in your fundamental energy metabolism. And for people who are on the sort of moderate to severe end of the spectrum, as I am, that might not even be the symptom that we find most, troubling or kind of limiting. I, for example, have a condition that about 80% of people with ME have, which is that I have something called postural-orthostatic tachycardia, or POTS, which means that my blood just rushes to the bottom of my feet all of the time, and I have a hard time keeping it up at my heart and my brain. And so that's much more troubling to me. It's a disease that really steals lives. And so I think that a large part of the reason why it hasn't been researched and it hasn't been given the proper attention and investment is in part because of the name, is because of that stigma. And I also think in part because the majority of people who get it are women.
At what point did you decide you want to make a film about this?
I started filming myself before I knew it was a film. I started filming myself on my iPhone because I was, I think when I became bedridden and I didn't have a name for what was happening to me, and doctors were telling me that it wasn't real, or it was in my head, or that I wasn't sick, I felt profoundly isolated because I couldn't even explain to my friends, to my community, what was happening, let alone to myself. And so I needed a way to sort of make sense of that experience. And I'd always been someone who would journal or write for myself. But I had lost the ability to write. So I would write like a sentence of an email, and then I would pass out for 4 hours. And I would try to write, and I would make these sort of nonsense word substitutions. I would write a paragraph, and I would look back and read it, and it would make no sense. And so I had a friend who's a writer who said, one day you'll get better and you'll write a book. So just start, documenting yourself and what you're feeling now, because you'll want that later. And so I started filming myself, and it was really this way to kind of process these really difficult emotions around what that was like. And it wasn't really until, I guess, sort of two things happened. One, I went online and found this whole community of people who were also homebound and bedridden and had been similarly abandoned by medicine. And that, I think, helped me see that there was this much larger story here. Mm-hmm. But it was also this moment that I was in a doctor's office, and I took out my phone because I was trying to describe to him in words what was happening to me when I was too sick to get into the office, when I was at home, at 11 o'clock at night, collapsed on the floor, unable to move, unable to speak. And I could say that to him. And in his mind, he would say, oh, okay, like you have a headache or, or something totally ridiculous. But I took out my phone and I showed him, and I said, no, look, this is what it's really like. And that completely changed the conversation. And that's when I started to think about the fact that if I wanted to tell the story, it had to be visual. And that a large part of the reason why this has been allowed to happen is that doctors, our neighbors, our own families, like literally can't see us. And they can't see that 25% of people who are homebound or bedridden. And so I thought, if we can bring cameras into our homes and into these intimate spaces, that might begin to sort of change the story.
You had never set out to be a filmmaker. You never trained to be a filmmaker, or filmmaking kind of came to you out of necessity.
I think I didn't really understand any of this until I went to the edit and story lab at Sundance. But I think that fundamentally artists are people who feel compelled to express themselves, what they see in the world, right? And I think, been an artist my whole life without necessarily realizing it, but I have that compulsion. And writing was always my medium. But when I got sick, all I can do was lay in bed, look at photographs on Pinterest, and watch movies, sometimes with the sound turned really, really low.
Because you're very sensitive to sound.
Exactly, yes. And so I think I started to become much more visual, in part because that became my only way of accessing and thinking about the world. But I grew up in movie theaters. I've seen, I think probably from, I would say, the age of 6 to 16, I saw every feature that got, a kind of general release in
Yes.
sort of commercial theaters.
That was my experience
or in
too.
indie theaters. Like my mom would take me to the movie theater on Saturday for an afternoon showing or a matinee. And then we would just take our one ticket and then go see 3 films, and every weekend we did that. And so film has always been something that I've loved, but I grew up in, north of Orlando, and it was something that, where I think if you were really going to make it, success was becoming a dentist, and film was sort of something that, I don't know, other people did. Films grew on trees, and it never occurred to me that people make them, or that I could make them. So it came out of necessity, but I also think that I would never have tried to make a film had I not lost everything, because I think it would have been something that seemed too insane and too risky. But once everything you think you are is taken from you, you sort of, at least for me, I felt like, well, I have nothing left to lose. So why not? Why not just go for it? And I have no idea how I'm going to do it, but it needs to happen. And so I knew I would find a way.
So the way you got it financially started is you did a crowdfunding campaign, which you were telling me about on a panel the other day. And I jokingly said, because you're so successful, don't try this at home. And you said, no, you should try this at home. So tell me about that campaign.
Yeah. So this was, I guess, in 2013. And, at that point, I don't think I even knew a single filmmaker. I reached out to my sister-in-law who had gone to film school and sort of, was saying, I really want to make this movie, but I'm too weak to hold a camera. And I also want to shoot myself. So how do I do that? And we talked in circles for 15 minutes until finally she was like, "Oh, you mean you want to hire a DP?" And I was like, "Oh yeah, what's that? I think that sounds right." So I went on a listserv and I said I need to hire a DP, and I found this amazing young filmmaker named Kieran Tatanovas who came on to help me kind of shoot the campaign. And I would basically, I knew I wanted to sort of shoot 6 days, and I would shoot one day each month, crash in bed for 29 days, and then do it again the next month. So I shot one day a month for 6 months, and then we put together this fundraising trailer. And I had a goal of raising about $50,000, and I was really afraid that I wouldn't make it. And within about 48 hours, we reached our goal and ended up raising about $212,000. And that to me was really a reflection of how many people felt the same way I did. How many, I think fundamentally, I wanted to tell this story because I felt like I didn't have a story, that I was that sick. My whole life, when I wanted to try to understand myself, I would read books and watch films, and they would help me understand the world in some way and how to feel about things, how to think about things. And I didn't have a narrative for this experience, and that was really lonely in a way that I could never have imagined. And the campaign showed me that there were thousands and thousands of people who felt the same way, that their story had been stolen. There was nothing there to replace it. So that was how we put the financing together to start the film. And I think that was how we were able to start bringing on people, in the documentary industry, because it wasn't just me saying the story matters. It was thousands of people who were saying, we're waiting for the story to be told.
So you had this young camera woman who was, sounds like a key person. Were there other kind of key people that helped open the door to realize this film?
Yeah. So the Kickstarter campaign really, it was sort of, the funding was incredible, obviously, but it was also a sort of a side effect of just the kind of love for the story. But I think one of the most significant things to come out of that campaign was that I met Debbie Hoffman, who is a very well-known filmmaker. She directed it along with her partner Frances Reed, Long Night's Journey into Day. I also directed Complaints of a Dutiful Daughter, editor of The Times of Harvey Milk. So a really accomplished filmmaker. And someone had shared the campaign with her on Facebook. And so she Facebook messaged me and said, hi, I'm a filmmaker and I want to help you. And I remember thinking, okay, yeah, whatever. Because at that point I had everyone and their cousin was emailing me like, can I compose your film? Can I shoot for you? And but I looked her up and then I was like, oh my God. And then we had a conversation, and she really took me under wing and started mentoring me, and just was this amazing person to help me find my way into this. And I think the most profound thing that she gave me was just helping me to trust my instincts, and also keeping me to an extremely high standard. So every time I thought I was done, she said, no, Jen, the bar is up here. So she was really the best mentor. And the campaign allowed me to start to then hire and put together teams around the world to tell what came to be a sort of global story. So I brought on my producer, Lindsay Dryden, who's based in the UK, Trish Gillespie, who's based in New York, Anna Hjort in Denmark, and we hired these crews who would be able to go and shoot in the field because I couldn't. And I fairly early on, I realized that it was just not a good idea. I would try to go on shoots, and it was just much too costly for me.
So you've described the way lots of people who suffer from this sometimes face a medical community that doesn't understand it or is in outright denial of it, people, like friends and family who have confusion around it. And you document a lot of this in your film. Can you give a couple examples that would sort of illustrate for someone who hasn't seen the film or hasn't encountered this, the sense of opposition that sometimes people face?
Yeah, so I think I've interviewed a lot of people with this disease, and I think for me, whether you're a man or a woman, there's this sort of universal sense of disbelief. I mean, I think everybody sees at least one doctor, if not many, many doctors who say, you're not really sick. It's all in your head. I know women who've been told, oh, just what you really need is a new haircut, or you're just depressed. Maybe you should divorce your husband. There was one doctor who took my husband Omar in another room and said, it's okay if you leave her. So I don't know any other disease where this happens, or where suddenly you get this and sort of your relationships and even your memories become suspect. I mean, my neurologist told me that all of my symptoms were being caused by a distant trauma that I couldn't remember, which I found really convenient because he didn't know what it was either, So it's like, suppose a trauma. And so I think there's that kind of low-grade disbelief. I think there are other patients who I think can be harmed very severely by medical advice. So the most common treatment for this is something called graded exercise. And there are forms of physical therapy that can help patients, but you have to stay within those sort of metabolic limits. If we go into basically what's called anaerobic metabolism, which is, if you run marathons, like you know that there's sort of this space where you go where you're just kind of generating lactic acid. And if you go to that place, like, you're going to crash. And so it has to be done very carefully, but patients are being prescribed exercise without any sense of what those underlying dynamics are. And the consequence of that can be really catastrophic. I know people who were only very mildly affected who then, after exercising, became homebound for essentially the rest of their lives. And so what, scientists and experts in the field are starting to say is that prescribing exercise without a sense of what those limits are is, akin to telling diabetics to eat more sugar. And then I think one of the things that I found most shocking once I started to really dig deeper into the history of this community is that there have been a number of patients, children as well as adults, in the US and all across Europe who have been taken from their homes forcibly by police and put into foster care or put into institutions with the idea that they are suffering with a psychosomatic illness and that it's their family environment that's causing this.
So we see a particularly dramatic example of this in Denmark in the film, but you're saying that's not a singular episode.
No, not at all. I know of a teenage boy in North Carolina who was taken for a year from his family and put in foster care. A patient of Dr. Klimas's was a child was put into foster care, and they had to go to court. And that family fled the state because they just were too afraid. In Europe, there was a case in Germany, a case in Norway, dozens of cases in the UK. So this does happen. And, it's akin to sort of what we used to say about autism, right? We used to say that, children developed autism because their mothers were too cold.
Refrigerator mothers.
Exactly. And we also told sort of psychological stories about multiple sclerosis, right? That was hysterical paralysis until the CAT scan. Epileptics used to be put into mental institutions until the EEG. And so I think medicine has always had this hard time dealing with illnesses that could not be objectively measured, meaning the doctor can't see that you're sick from some type of third-party measurement. I think medicine has a hard time with illnesses where we have to believe the patient and believe what they're telling us about what their experience is.
In Unrest, the other main character is Jennifer's husband, Omar Wasso. He teaches at Princeton and was a co-founder of the website Black Planet. He's been interviewed about technology on CNN, Oprah, and The Today Show. As Jennifer's illness worsened, his career took a different turn as he devoted more time to her as a caregiver. As the years went by, they came to accept their lives were different from their peers. Here's a moment in the film when Omar has a conversation with Jennifer in hushed tones.
There are moments where I see us through other people's eyes, and somehow that's much sadder than when I'm just kind of living our life together. This is normal for us.
It's so normal.
And it's only when other people observe how not normal it is that I'm forced to recalibrate and sit with how hard this is. You know what it is about being observed? It's that people feel sorry for me. And I don't know why that.
Baby, I'm so sorry.
It's a nerve.
I asked Jennifer about their willingness to record those emotional moments.
I mean, I think that I think part of what allowed me to go there is that I'm directing the film. So I always knew that if at the end of the day, if there was something that I really didn't want to share, I could, choose to remove it from the cut, right? But I knew that while we were filming, I wanted to present as authentic and real an expression of what the truth is, and that I would worry about the edit later, And so in the moment, we were shooting constantly, sometimes on my iPhone, sometimes with our camera, sometimes with our DP. And I think there are a couple of reasons why I chose to do that. I mean, first, I wanted to make a really good film, and I thought that for me, like, the films that I love are the ones that are emotionally honest. And I whenever something's not true, I feel it. I can feel when I'm not being shown the truth. And so it was really important for me to sort of hold myself to that standard as a filmmaker. But I also just know, one of the things that I found early on as I started interviewing people is that there's no pain, there's no experience that is yours alone, right? Like, there are so many people who, whether they have this disease or another condition, have had the experience of having some type of asteroid hit their lives that throws everything into question. We will all one day be caregivers to someone we love or be cared for. And that's just a part of what it is to be human. And I think that we often hide that pain and that grief. And one of the things that I learned that was really what helped me to survive was that in that process of interviewing, I got to feel like I wasn't alone. I got to hear someone else's story and to know that what they were feeling, what they were afraid of, what haunted them, what gave them hope, they were the same things that I was sort of struggling with. And that, I think, in some ways also gave me that courage, and I began to sort of see that when these things are shared, they stop being so terrifying. And so I think both Omar and I felt like, if that private pain could help other people, then we wanted to share it. And in the sharing, it could transform it into something that wasn't just loss. It could make it something positive and maybe even something beautiful.
So for my last question,
we're recording this in the week when you first presented this film to an audience at the Sundance Film Festival. Probably listeners will be hearing this several months later. But can you tell me what that experience has been like showing it to audiences finally?
Oh, man. It's been remarkable. Every screening has been different. And I think one of the things that I'm realizing is that it's resonating with audiences in a deeper way than I could have imagined or thought. Like I knew what it would mean to my community, but I didn't know what it might mean to others. So, for example, at the premiere, there was one young woman who stood up and said, I just got into this, film on the wait list. I didn't even know what it was about. And I've been sitting here shaking and crying the whole time because this is my story. And I've been sick for years and I didn't know what I had. And, my doctors told me I was crazy. My family thinks I'm just lazy and I'm not. And now I know what I have. And I mean, that is what I hoped for with this film. And the response and the emotion has just been incredible. And especially from I've been meeting a lot of young women here with a variety of conditions who you would never know they were sick. I mean, beautiful, vibrant women who are coming up to me and saying, I deal with chronic pain, or I deal with this autoimmune disease and I'm just getting worse and worse and I'm afraid that my family's going to have to take care of me. And I saw this film and now I know it's going to be okay. And if I could give that type of hope, to other people out of my experience, then I do think all of this will have been worth it. So it's been really incredible being able to share that with audiences. And I'm excited for the film to get out there and for more people to see it.
I want to thank Jennifer Brea for speaking with me. You can watch Unrest streaming on iTunes, Amazon, and other platforms. If you enjoy Pure Nonfiction, I invite you to listen to our short-form podcast called Documentary of the Week. Every Friday, we take 2 minutes to recommend a new film. Documentary of the Week is produced by WNYC. You can subscribe for free on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. For more information, visit wnyc.org/docs. Thanks to the Pure Nonfiction team. Series producer, Sarah Moto. Sound mixer, Tom Micah. Web designer, Cross Strategy. And social media master, Jordan Smith. Our theme music is composed by Andre Williams, and our executive producer is Rafaela Nehausen. I'm Tom Powers. You can follow me on Twitter at THOMPowers. Pure Nonfiction is distributed by the TIFF Podcast Network. You can read our show notes, learn about live events, and sign up for our newsletter at purenonfiction.net.